There is a buried clay pot in a garden somewhere in New Mexico right now, quietly watering a row of tomatoes that nobody has touched in 6 days. It cost $9 to build. It has no pump, no hose, no timer, no electricity, and it is outperforming the drip irrigation system your neighbor just spent $400 installing. The strangest part is that this device is not new technology. It is so old that medieval monks were already calling it traditional 800 years ago, and Chinese farmers had written it down 2,000 years before that. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly what this device is, why it works better than almost anything sold in a modern garden center, and how to build one yourself this weekend from 2 terracotta pots and a tube of silicone you can buy at any hardware store. By the end, you will have a complete picture of an irrigation method that uses up to 70% less water than the hose you are probably using right now, and you will understand why the gardening industry has very quietly let this knowledge slip out of the public conversation. The device has a name. It is called an olla, pronounced oh-yah, and at its heart, it is nothing more than an unglazed clay vessel buried up to its neck in the soil of a garden bed. You fill it with water through a small hole at the top. You cap that hole with a saucer or a flat stone to keep mosquitoes and evaporation out, and then you walk away. For the next 3 to 7 days, depending on the weather and the plants around it, that pot will release water directly into the root zone of your garden at exactly the rate the plants need it. Not faster, not slower. The plants themselves dictate the speed. To understand why that is almost magical, you need to understand one small fact about unglazed terracotta. The clay is microporous, which is a fancy way of saying it has millions of tiny openings invisible to the naked eye. Water inside the pot wants to seep out through those openings, but it can only do so as fast as the surrounding soil is willing to pull it. When the soil around the pot is bone dry, the plant roots in that soil are thirsty, and thirsty roots generate a powerful suction known as capillary tension. That tension yanks water out of the clay walls. But when the soil is already saturated, there is no suction, and the water simply stays inside the pot waiting. You cannot overwater a garden with an olla. You cannot underwater one either. The plants regulate themselves. A researcher at the University of California, Riverside named D.A. Bainbridge spent years formalizing the modern science behind this method, and his measurements are difficult to argue with. Buried clay pot irrigation uses 50 to 70% less water than surface watering. In some trials, it is up to 10 times more efficient than conventional flood or sprinkler systems. A field study in Kenya comparing ollas against the standard furrow irrigation used for maize and tomato crops recorded a 97% reduction in water consumption, 97%. And the yields were not just preserved, they climbed 32 to 44% higher than the conventional control group. In a separate trial in India, a melon crop irrigated with ollas produced 25 tons per hectare using only 2 centimeters of water. The same crop grown with flood irrigation required 26 centimeters of water to produce 33 tons. 13 times more water for 30% more yield. The math is not subtle. There is a second benefit that almost nobody talks about, and you will appreciate it the moment you stop spending your Saturday mornings yanking weeds. Because the surface soil stays dry while the moisture pools underground around the pot, weed seeds on the surface never get the contact moisture they need to germinate. Gardens irrigated with ollas show up to 87% fewer weeds. You water less, you weed less, you harvest more. But there is a catch we will get to in a moment because not every plant in your garden is a good candidate for this method. First, the history, because the history is where the story gets strange. The earliest written record of buried clay pot irrigation appears in a Chinese agricultural manual called the Fan Shengji Shu. compiled during the late Western Han Dynasty in the 1st century before the Common Era. That manuscript describes farmers burying porous earthenware vessels in their fields to deliver water directly to crop roots. 2,000 years ago, while the rest of the world was still figuring out the basics of crop rotation, Chinese farmers were running passive subsurface irrigation. The technique spread westward. Roman gardeners used similar vessels in the kitchen gardens of villas around the Mediterranean. North African farmers, who faced chronic water scarcity, refined the method for arid agriculture. Indigenous peoples across the American Southwest used ollas for centuries before any Europeans set foot on the continent. Then, somewhere around the 12th century, the technique arrived inside the walls of European monasteries, and this is where it found its perfect home. Medieval monks lived under a strict daily schedule built around the canonical hours of prayer. They could not stand over rows of lettuce with a watering can all afternoon. They had to attend liturgy, copy manuscripts, brew beer, bake bread, study scripture. But they also had to feed their communities, and the cloister garden, the walled green space at the heart of every monastery, was the original kitchen garden of Europe. It produced herbs for medicine, vegetables for the refectory table, and flowers for the altar. To keep that garden alive without abandoning their religious duties, monks turned to the olla. They buried clay pots between their rows of carrots and cabbages and onions, and those pots quietly handled the irrigation work while the monks attended to their prayers. The technology has not meaningfully changed in 800 years. It never needed to. So how do you build one? The materials list is almost embarrassingly short. You need 2 unglazed terracotta pots, somewhere between 6 and 10 inches in diameter. The cheap kind sold at any hardware store for $2 or $3 each. You need 1 tube of food-safe silicone or aquarium sealant, the kind that will not leach chemicals into your water. You need a terracotta saucer to use as the top lid, and you need either a small flat stone or a cork to plug one of the drainage holes. Total cost lands at around $9, sometimes less. The build itself takes about 10 minutes of active work and 1 overnight cure. Step 1. Take one of the pots and plug the drainage hole in the bottom with silicone or a cork. Let it set. Step 2. Run a continuous bead of silicone around the entire rim of that same pot. Step 3. Flip the second pot upside down and press its rim firmly against the first pot's rim, lining them up so the silicone forms a watertight seal. You now have what looks like a hollow clay football with one small hole at the very top, which used to be the drainage hole of the upper pot. Step 4. Let the assembled vessel cure overnight in a dry location. Step 5. Soak the cured pot in a bucket of water for 1 hour to prime the clay walls so they begin releasing moisture immediately when buried. Step 6. Dig a hole in your garden bed deep enough to bury the entire assembly up to the very top rim, leaving only that small drainage hole exposed at soil level. Step 7. Fill the buried pot with water through the top hole. Step 8. Cover the hole with the terracotta saucer to block mosquitoes from breeding inside and to prevent surface evaporation. That is the entire build. Now, placement matters, and this is where most beginners get into trouble. A medium 2-quart olla effectively waters a radius of 2 to 3 feet of surrounding soil. That makes it perfect for placing between 2 tomato plants, between a pair of pepper plants, or in the center of a small cluster of herbs. A larger 1-gallon olla handles a single heavy feeder all by itself, things like squash, melon, or pumpkin. Ollas work beautifully with tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, melons, beans, peas, lettuce, kale, and almost every culinary herb. Here is the catch I promised you. Ollas do not work well with taprooted vegetables. Carrots, radishes, beets, and parsnips send a single root straight down rather than spreading laterally, and they will not effectively find the moisture pooling sideways from a buried pot. Plant those crops elsewhere. Ollas also do not germinate seeds. The surface needs to be dry for weed suppression. which means it is also too dry for sprouting seedlings. Water young plants by hand at the surface for the first 2 to 6 weeks until their roots reach down and find the olla on their own. Refilling is the easy part. Most gardens require a top-up once every 3 to 7 days, depending on heat, humidity, plant size, and pot capacity. During the peak of summer, a single 1-gallon olla can sustain a fully grown tomato plant for nearly a week without intervention. A simple trick is to drop a small floating marker into the pot. A piece of cork on a stick will do, so you can glance at the water level without lifting the saucer. If you live somewhere that freezes hard in winter, dig the ollas up in late autumn and store them indoors. Wet clay expands when it freezes and will crack a pot you spent the season getting to know. Which raises the obvious question: if this works so well, if it has been documented and refined for 2,000 years, if monks were already considering it ancient technology in the 1200s, why does almost nobody you know use one? Why does every garden center in your town sell plastic drip irrigation kits with timers and emitters and fittings instead of 2 clay pots and a tube of silicone? The honest answer is that there is no business model in selling something that lasts forever. Drip irrigation systems require pumps, filters, timers, hoses, fittings, emitters, and electricity. Plastic emitters clog with mineral deposits within a season. UV light cracks hoses. Fittings leak. Controllers fail and need replacement batteries. Every component is a recurring purchase, a service call, an upsell. The drip irrigation industry generates billions of dollars in annual sales worldwide because the products are designed to wear out. An olla is a one-time purchase that lasts decades with no moving parts to fail. The simplest tool ever invented for putting water in the ground quietly outperforms the complicated machinery sitting on the shelf at every home improvement store, and the people selling that machinery have no incentive whatsoever to mention it to you. So here you are, with the same $9 machine that watered Chinese fields under the Han Dynasty, that filled Roman kitchen gardens, that kept medieval cloister beds alive between matins and vespers. 2 clay pots, a dab of silicone, a hole in the ground. It has been waiting in plain sight the entire time, sitting on a shelf next to the petunias, completely unremarkable and completely overlooked. The monks knew, the Chinese farmers knew. The seeds of this knowledge have been sitting in the dirt of human history for 2,000 years, and all anyone has ever needed to do is pick up a shovel and try it. Build one this weekend. Bury it next to your tomatoes. Then walk away for a week and see what happens. If you have a garden corner that has been frustrating you with thirsty plants and wasted water, this is the experiment worth running before the season gets any hotter.